Hey you, no, the other person behind you who's watching this video. Are you struggling to win in Slay the Spire 2? Looking for a professional guide on how to play and win as the Necrobinder? Looking for the strats that will make you clear high-level ascensions with ease? Maybe you even want to know exactly what cards you should be taking at any time. Well, I got news for you! This is the wrong video. No, instead of giving you top-level advice via abandoning the idea of touching grass, this video is instead full of advice meant for even the most underdeveloped of minds. This guide will give you the gist on how to succeed and enjoy the character, worded in the most impractical way I possibly can. It is a guide that will either be your speed or damage your brain cells enough to make it your speed. I'm the Bottom Dweller, and this is the Caveman's Guide to Necrobinder. Necrobinder is the new goth calcium crusader introduced in this game with a character selection image showing her hitting the Elon Musk pose. Necrobinder is your bread and butter tried and true summoner character whose core mechanics involve your favorite most intimate hand becoming sentient and having it take punishment while you prepare your master plan. And given how frequently you use your hand, safe to say that it's not unfamiliar with this amount of usage. Necrobinder is one of the more interesting characters in the game because, mechanically speaking, she ignores all the game's usual combat systems in a number of ways. Characters in this game are pretty straightforward for the most part. You block when you block, you damage when you damage, debuffs applied to you affect every card related to that debuff, vice versa for buffs. Pretty simple shit. Necrobinder, on the other hand, is the character equivalent of coming in with homebrew rules for fucking Uno, where the rules conveniently ignore you but affect everyone else. It's borderline cheating, and yet your punk ass will still lose, because no amount of cheating will ever save you from the fact that you're utter dog shit in this game. If you want to learn and take advantage of your special OC's rules, we gotta first discuss the archetypes for the character. Our goth queen has what I've seen to be 4 major archetypes. However, right away, she already violates the rules, as it's more like she has 2 primary beast of archetypes, with the other 2 being more supplemental until given cards that makes them not that. So for the sake of pacing, let's talk about the main ones first. Ethereal Binder is the archetype built on the titular keyword. Teehee, I said Euler. The whole goal is to play a bunch of Ethereal cards and get benefits for doing so. Ethereal as a keyword is a lot like an attention-starved X. Remains around so long as you give them attention, but the moment you decide not to acknowledge their existence, they bail on your ass to seek it elsewhere until they inevitably return when they don't get it. The difference being that the cards actually have value. In other words, they're cards that only exist if you play them and exhaust, aka vanish for the rest of the fight, when you don't. Most of them having pretty strong effects either innately or after an upgrade. Some of the cornerstone cards for this archetype are cards that say do a thing based on how many ethereal cards you've played, or alternatively doing a thing based on how many cards you've exhausted, giving you a net benefit for either playing the cards all the time or not playing them at all and just playing a card that will play them for free anyways. Having both being a rare deal, but when it happens they'll make noises you didn't think possible, and trust me, I know the noises that I make, those were new. The second main one is affectionately known as Big Austy. This build is not only what I consider to be the strongest ever kit, but the easiest to set up, considering she literally starts with 2 of the most important cards to get it started. And just for the sake of having a term for what build a character's starting cards lean into, we'll call this the character's default state. Big Austy is pretty much as it sounds. Take your hand, give it Arnie's steroid regimen, and give your enemies a new definition of cheek clappage. The win condition card being the one you happen to start with that does more damage the more HP Austy has. So the strategy is literally just keeping Austy alive, rapidly accumulating its HP using summon cards, and then either one-shot or close to one-shotting anything that gives you their phone number because you're above these basement-dwelling chuds. This build's already strong enough, but this build type alone already comes with a number of fuck the rules mechanics, one of the big ones being that any damage debuff you get doesn't apply to Austy at all. Weakness and strength down, the mechanics that make big damage builds like this significantly worse on other characters, a non-issue for your massive pulsating bone. Austy also pretty much functions like a stored shield to an extent, being another way this character completely ignores rules. Block on characters most of the time go away at the start of your next turn, with the one exception I can think of being the power card for Ironclad that says it doesn't do that. However, Necrobinder's summon mechanic is effectively having a permanent shield that you not only have at the literal start of the game, but also regenerates itself and gains 1 every turn. This means summon cards, while being a means of obtaining girth that will surely satisfy the mistress, can also be seen as effectively stored shield to take hits when you pull the classic move of accidentally putting more damage than block cards in your deck. Now you might be saying, if these are the 2 main builds, then what's the 2 supplementary build types? I'm getting there, you impatient fuck. The 2 supplemental types are the Doom and Soul builds. Souls are actually pretty easy to explain, so let's start with that one. Soul builds are all about drawing cards for free by adding soul cards to your deck. Soul cards being a 0 mana draw 2 with exhaust. What's exhaust? Well, you'd know if you're paying attention in the previous section, but let me explain in a more direct way this time. Exhaust is the opposite of Ethereal. Instead of sticking around when you give it attention, it immediately ghosts your ass on the first message like my matches on Bumble. This effectively means that you can actually draw 1 and the soul card gets played and then replaced with 1 from your deck. Now what makes this build supplemental is that really there's no reason not to have a couple soul cards in your deck. Mostly because all the soul giving cards are actually just a solid card effect with giving you a soul as a bonus. And yeah, there's cards that make a prominent build type, but even then you'd be better off using it as a means to speed up the other 2. Moving on to Doom, Doom is an effect that people have often dubbed as worse poison. And I think the people who say that need a dent puller because their skull looks pretty dented already, and I'm about to promote that shit into a crater just for saying this. So then what actually is Doom? Aside from being a pretty good Marvel villain and a legendary rap artist, Doom is a debuff that ends fights early. If the enemy's health is at or below the Doom debuff value it has, the enemy will instantly die at the end of their turn. Key words, end of their turn. So even if you have enough Doom to kill it, you'll still need to figure out surviving that one-shot attack you probably overlooked by indulging the greed they talk about in the Bibble, and you should have never questioned the mighty Jimmy before going balls deep in the Doom maxing. Now that end of the turn detail is often what people determine as the reason Doom is a worse poison, but it's not, and let me give you 4 solid reasons as to why. 1, it's an effect that requires 0 upkeep or commitment to keep going, and it's stagnant so long as the enemy doesn't have ways to remove it. 2, it's an effect that completely ignores buffs on enemies that prevent or limit our damage, as it's not technically damage. 3, considering this character is all about setting up a master plan, having cards to shorten the work required to finish your plan is generally a good thing to have. And 4, it's an effect that is also just attached to a really good effect. For example, you know how we start with defend cards that block 5? Here's Negative Pulse, which is 5 block and 7 Doom to all enemies, making it not only a fantastic way to both block and end fights, but it's a solid solution to getting rid of the artifact buff on multiple enemies in the fight. Strike cards? Fuck them, we got Blight Strike. Not only does it do 2 more damage than Strike at the base level, but it also applies Doom, making it effectively a 1 mana deal fucking 16. Not to mention that any damage buff will effectively be doubled because Doom on Blight Strike is again basically double damage. I cannot stress that enough. Where Poison on Silent is a more dedicated build type that requires upkeep, maintenance, and more importantly dedicated setup, Doom is something you can do without even thinking about it, making it just a really good debuff in general that has actually won me more runs than I can count just by being there. And that's all ignoring the fact that there are cards that actually do damage based on how much Doom the enemy has, or ends fights if the enemy is already at the Doom point after applying 32 more Doom to it. The reason I deem this build more supplemental though is that while yes, it is technically possible to make an absolutely powerful Doom build, it's just often also on some really good effects that doesn't require you to do anything at all to just make it good and viable in the first place. Bottom line, Doom has value whether you're building into it or not. That being said, enough about archetypes. What do we do to actually win as this character? In the same way that Necrobinder absolutely ignores many of the mechanics of the game, she also plays the game in a very different way than the rest of the cast. While other characters are often about absolutely mag dumping into the enemy as fast as possible, the key to success with Necrobinder plays a lot more like opening Clash of Clans on your phone and blocking until your ass-beating plan is done cooking in the nuclear oven. In other words, patience. Something I know that most of you here lack, considering the ever-declining attention span records and the fact that most of you probably clicked off when this wasn't Minecraft. Necrobinder is a character who doesn't start fights innately strong, but instead builds up and ramps into being stronger than most characters in the game. Most of your initial turns will be spent being defensive during setup, only mag dumping when you truly have the ability to end the fight right then and there, or if doing so actually conveniently allows you to prevent more damage. However, there is such a thing as waiting too long, as a lot of monsters in this game scale based on turn count, so if you're being outscaled, that's when you need to serve that can of whoop ass at room temperature. God, I'm hungry. If you're in an Ethereal build, you want to keep Austy alive by any means necessary. If you're in an Austy build, you want to keep Austy alive and healthy by any means necessary. Yeah, spoiler, that core mechanic of your character, doesn't matter what build you're running, you're gonna need them. Austy prevents you from taking damage, and like I said before, can be seen as stored shield. If Austy goes down, your health will start going down. I don't know if you know this, but ideally you want your health to be as far from 0 as possible. Even cards that kill Austy to give you shield or do damage is often scaled on how much health he has, so even when you aren't planning on using Big Austy, you're gonna want to be able to keep Austy from being brittle at least. Also, just like with any character, you don't want to lock into an archetype too early. Picking a build type before you even see the first 3 cards is a swift way to get yourself dumpstered. I wouldn't recommend it on any character, even less so Necrobinder. Also, at any shop you go to, atomize your starting strikes. Yes, regardless of your build, you'll either be doing all your damage with Austy, or by this point have attacks that are just straight up better than them and cost the same or less. You don't need them. But what if I have the Witch's Ember? You don't need them. But what if I have Strike Dummy? You don't need them. Send those strikes to the place where all creativity goes to die. AAA Game Studios. Don't get too greedy with elites early on either, unless you're really juiced. Necrobinder, just like her playstyle, takes time to properly ramp up before you can start beefing with the universe. In fact, it'll probably take you longer than other characters to ramp, considering her distinct lack of beef on her, and that's not just a joke about her being a literal skeleton. Necrobinder is my favorite character to play in this game. Her very unique approach to combat and deck building in this game makes her easily stand out in my opinion, and that's not just because I can see the big bone she's packing. Once you master how she plays, you'll see that not only is she an absolute blast to play, but she's a powerhouse in the right hands, and I'd know because I'm a content creator. We all know content creators are always right and never spread misinformation, especially about game balance or metas, and you know I'm absolutely 100% correct because I'm belligerently confident in being louder about how good Doom is. That sums up how to play Necrobinder. If you like what you saw here today and want more, hit the like and sub button. I also got a Discord you should join by using the link in the description, or don't. You do you, I'm not your mom. This has been the Bond Dweller bringing you videos you didn't ask for.